Hi everybody, my guest today is bass player Malcolm Moore. Malcolm has played with a host of artists over the years, including Westlife, James Blunt, Robbie Williams and more. He's also, for the last 5 years or so, been the bass player in the West End production of Mamma Mia in London. Here's what he had to say. And the next thing I need you to do is just strike a pose so I can take a thumbnail, just take a little shot for the thumbnail of this, okay?
Right.
You ready? So I'm going to point at you, and then you're going to pull a nice face. Ready? 3.
Whoa. What do you mean pull a face?
Well, just do a nice smile. It's just like a posy picture.
Okay.
It's going to be like that.
All right. Okay.
Ready? 3, 2, 1. That's it. That's all you need to do. Okay. So trying to think. Okay, here we go. You ready?
Yeah.
Come on then. Hi, Mal.
Hello, Chris. It's nice to see you.
It's lovely to see you too. How's things?
It's good, thanks. Yeah, all right. Weird, but good.
Yes. Right. Listen, I need to probably we need to explain before we move on that we are actually quite good friends. I'd probably say very good friends, in fact, because
I'll go with that, yeah.
I have an unhealthy amount of pictures in my camera roll of you and me at various eating establishments in London for all the meals that we've had. We've had many nice beers together. We've also played a lot of ABBA tunes together several hundred times, I would imagine, at this point in time.
Yeah.
Something which we'll actually move on to later. But you're also actually the first bass player to come on and do one of these.
Am I? Okay.
Yeah, and I know obviously you're not a lefty or whatever, but you are the first bass player.
Well, thanks. I feel honoured.
Well, that's all right. I thought we've had obviously quite a few guitarists, quite a few lefty guitarists. We've had a couple of drummers. We've had some singers on here. We've had some producers. And then I thought, for the first bass player, it's got to be my favorite person, my favorite bass player, someone who I love very much. But Jazz Lockery wasn't available. So I'm sorry.
It's perfectly all right.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
You had me going there for a while.
Right. Listen, let's go. I'm actually quite interested because I'm going to find out some stuff about you, I'm sure, that I don't even know, even though we've known each other for quite some time. So let's go back to the early days. I'm going to say that none of your family are musical, or am I wrong?
No one plays an instrument, no.
That's what I thought. So where did it come from, and when did you pick it up, and what made you want to play?
My dad had a lot of records. He had that's why I said no one plays an instrument, because he was really into music, very specifically kind of West Coast 70s stuff, the Eagles, Elton John, Neil Diamond, that sort of era of stuff. He's really into all that. But he also had older stuff, Beatles records and stuff from his younger days.
Okay.
And so that was on in the car all the time, and I really liked it. I didn't really know why, and I certainly didn't know how to play any of it at that point, but I just was really into it. I used to really enjoy listening to it. And then my sister, who's 5 years older than me, started to learn to play the guitar. She only learned for a few weeks, so I don't count that as her playing an instrument, but she brought a guitar home into the house. And I thought, I don't know, that looks like fun. So when she stopped playing a little while later, I thought, I'm going to have a go at that, because there was just a guitar in the house. So I just started trying to play the stuff I heard on my dad's records, very badly, obviously. And I just really liked it. And I'm sure you had the same experience, and lots of people do, where you just go, this is it, this is me.
Yeah.
I really like doing this. Yeah, I thought I liked other stuff, but I didn't, it turns out. I like this.
There you go. There doesn't need to be a reason behind it sometimes. And I think a lot of people, especially the same with me when I started, there wasn't a reason. It was just, that's what I really wanted to do. I really quite fancied doing it, So did you have, initially self-taught, did you have lessons, and what was the deal?
Yeah. So I initially I self-taught. Then my primary school had a once a week kind of guitar club thing after school. And so I went to that a few times, but I really didn't enjoy it. I don't know why. I didn't like the process of it. So I stopped that. I carried on just sort of learning at home. And then in my final year of primary school, we got a dedicated music teacher at my primary school, which was incredible. A guy called Malcolm Timms, incredible fella, came in started a school orchestra immediately, even though hardly anyone played any instruments yet. I say orchestra, it was like recorders and acoustic guitars and all that. Sure. But yeah, we felt like it was an orchestra. And he was incredible. And he bought a double bass for that orchestra. And in one music lesson, he just said, right, who wants to have a go at this? And because I could play a bit of guitar and because no one else could be bothered, all my mates were, Malcolm will do it. And so I went and had a go on this double bass. And the same thing as with the guitar, just immediately thought, well, I don't know what I've been doing before, but this is me now. I love it. It's great.
How funny.
And so I became the kind of double bass player of our school orchestra. Again, I could hardly play it at all, but was just sort of thrown in there and loved it and really enjoyed it. And then from there, that same music teacher sent me to a music school in Chelmsford, where I live now, called Chelmer Valley Music School. And again, really lucky, the guy who taught double bass there was the principal double bass player of the Royal Opera House. So I went in having been playing the double bass for about 6 months, had more or less no idea of what I was doing, and had this incredible teacher. And like I say, just landed on my feet, really.
Wow. Quite interesting though that it was actually it was the double bass. It wasn't a bass guitar. It wasn't electric bass or whatever. It was
it was double bass. For, like I said, guitar a bit first, but I could only play a few chords, and then the double bass, and then not long after that, I remember my dad saying, if you like the guitar and you like double bass, you should play the electric bass. So he went and bought me he bought me a K bass. Yeah. Remember those? Are they too old for you? K basses.
I don't think I remember.
It looked a bit like a Precision. K was the kind of bass you could buy out of the catalogue.
Sure.
When you were a kid. It was one of those ones, And he bought me one of those, but it looked like a Fender, and to me it sounded like a Fender, and again I just loved it. So.
Yeah, and didn't take up all the room in the house of having a massive double bass as well.
Well, at that point I didn't have did I have my own double bass by then? Probably around the same time I got a double bass as well, but before that was just using the school.
Yeah. So after you've been playing a little while, who were you were really starting to get into it. Who were your influences? Again,
at that age, and I'm talking about like 11 years old now. So I was around 10 when the story I just told happened. So now I'm about 11. I'm starting to really get into it. And it all just came from my dad's records. So the only records I had really were my dad's old ones. So Paul McCartney, the Beatles. Yeah. My dad had the first 4 Beatles albums. Nothing beyond that. Got a bit weird for him after that. For the first 4, the poppy ones he was really into. And I loved them as well. So McCartney, again, this is probably all by osmosis rather than me sitting there and going, I want to play like him. Sure. I didn't really think like that at that age, but that I was just listening to that stuff over and over. So then my dad had a few couple of Stones records. He had the single of My Generation by The Who, it's got a bass solo in it, obviously. And I was just fascinated by that. What's that?
Yeah.
How does he make it sound like that? And I just, through all of those records, I remember he had a Monkees album, which I thought was brilliant at the time. Great record. Just by listening to all of those and just thinking to myself, I don't really know how they're doing that, but I want to make that noise. Yes. Not just the bass, but the whole thing. I want to get some mates who can do it as well, and I want to make that racket.
Yes, which leads me on to, when did that happen then?
When did I start making that racket?
Yeah, when did you, what was your first experience of at least jamming with friends, or your first band or anything like that?
I tried to start a band when I was about 12, about 12, just with my mates, like who lived in the same street as me, more or less, who didn't really play. Okay. And I would so by that time, none of us had any drums, but by that time I had a little sort of Farfisa type organ and an acoustic guitar and an electric bass. So I would just give them the instruments and go, do this, just so that we could make that noise. Do you know what I mean? And I found that really exciting. I'm sure it was god awful, but at the time I found it really, really exciting. Thankfully, no recordings exist, at least that I'm aware of. But we even did a gig at our local youth club. We didn't play for long. We only knew a couple of songs, and we didn't really know them. But yeah, so I was about 12 years old, I would say. I first took the steps to go, right, I'm going to do this,
Yeah.
But like I say, very tentative and very amateur steps with people that didn't really play.
Yeah, of course, but that's how everyone learns, isn't it? And that's,
Yeah.
you're certainly not the only person, 'cause it was a very similar deal with me when I was at school and stuff like that. You first band in school and all of that business. When was it that you really sort of started taking it seriously when you left? Like, I'm trying to work towards the sort of era of when you were leaving school into where you were going to go with your life and how you'd try and make it pan out with playing for a living.
So I'm going to go a little bit before that, because that's where it started, really.
Sure.
So when I was about 14, I'd started playing with a drummer friend of mine, and I was playing keyboards and singing, and he was playing drums, and we used to do duo gigs in pubs, specifically a pub not far from where we lived, who did bands at the weekends, and we knew the landlord, and we ended up playing in there once a month or something.
Okay.
And from that came other gigs, like holiday camp gigs and things like that. And at one point, we even had an agent, booking us gigs at holiday camps and things. And we were underage to be in the bars and everything.
Sure.
But we started to earn a little bit of money. Not a lot, but it was better than a paper round.
Yeah.
And it was I think it happens to a lot of people where your career ends up being the thing you start earning money at, rather than you having this kind of mad goal and thinking, I'm going to be a session musician or rock star or whatever it might be, whatever the thing is. You just find yourself earning a little bit of money at it, so you keep doing it and you earn a little bit more, and then the next thing you know, that's your job, because that's what you do. So that's how it happens, really. It wasn't I didn't really think it was possible to make a living from being a musician. I didn't have anyone in my family that had done it. I had no reference point for it. I knew that people did, but I didn't know how. But I just gradually started to become a job, like a Saturday job to begin with, and then a bit more than that, and so it went on.
Yeah. So moving from the how did you sort of bridge the gap to like the first pro gigs that you had from doing those smaller gigs and the holiday camp things?
That all happened at university.
Yeah. So where did you go to uni?
I went to City University in London. Okay. Which was a combined course with the Guildhall School of Music. So you had your instrumental lessons at Guildhall. Okay. So I had double bass lessons at Guildhall. So I had a sort of double life right from the beginning, really, as a classical musician, double bass player, and a bit more rock and roll, playing pubs and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And that's always continued, really. Less so these days. I don't play much classical double bass these days, but up until fairly recently I did. So I went to university and studied double bass. Yes. At Guildhall, but it was also like a sound engineering course. It was quite
broad.
Yeah, it was a sort of academic music degree, but there was performance and sound engineering and all that as well. Yeah. And so there were some really, really good players on that course. I bet. One of whom, Tim Maple, guitar player, he was a year above me. Yeah. A piano player and composer, he's a composer now, called Dave Marrick, who you probably don't know, but just one of the most astonishing musicians to this day I've ever heard. Absolutely incredible. And there were a few people on that course that were that good. And initially it was a bit of a kick in the teeth. It was like, wow, no, these guys are proper. These guys can really play. Yeah. I thought I was quite good, not compared to these guys. And so there was an element of sort of, I'd quite like to be as good as them. So there's a little bit of motivation there. But also what happened was those guys started to get like proper gigs towards the end of our time at university, and we all ended up in the same band, I think called the Steve Martland Band. Okay. Martland, Martland, if you want to look it up. Okay. And he was a classical composer, but it was quite rock and roll in a way. It was like a big band lineup, lots of horns and a rhythm section and a piano and a marimba as well, and a violin. And he wrote this kind of modernist, minimalist classical music that was quite sort of funky, but quite weird and aggressive as well. But he got a deal with Factory Records, amazingly, for a classical composer, and so started to become a bit of a thing in the early 90s. And we were in his band. And from that, we started to get gigs with the BBC Symphony Orchestra, because he wrote some orchestral music as well, but his orchestral music had electric bass in it. Sure. So they would do some of his music in the proms or something, and the obvious thing to do was to get us in to play the electric parts, because we'd been playing his music all that time. Sure. So to answer your question, sorry, I'm waffling, but the bridge between doing it as a kind of Saturday job and it becoming a professional thing was really that band, that Steve Martland Band. Amazing. Because that went from that made that progression for us, really, because it was always a professional gig. We always got paid,
Sure,
but it wasn't doing very much. And it made that progression because it started to do more and more things, and it led to other things. And before we knew it, we were kind of doing it full time.
amazing. So that was really the first, your first big gig, I would say. Then the thing that sort of started the ball rolling at some speed. And where did it lead on to from there?
So we did these orchestral gigs. BBC Symphony, London Sinfonietta, serious orchestras that
sure.
we probably had. I speak for myself only. I probably had no right playing with these people. As a double bass player, I wouldn't ever have got into any of those orchestras.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I think a lot of musicians have it where you sometimes, it's quite easy to feel that you're out of your depth for certain gigs that you might do. Did you ever feel that you were out of your depth, and you think, well, how did I get here? How am I doing this? And how did you deal with it?
I definitely would have felt out of my depth if I was playing double bass and we were doing Mozart or something.
Sure.
Not that I couldn't have got around it, but I was certainly not in the league of the guys that do that all the time.
Right.
They're like Olympic musicians when it comes to that kind of things. I'm just not in that league at all. But because we were playing music that I knew more about than they did, this music to them was quite new and probably quite bizarre, but we knew it inside out.
So it was probably the opposite. Then you actually felt quite at home playing it, although
in a way, yeah.
In a strange, different environment, you know what I mean?
Yeah, the environment was a bit intimidating.
Yeah,
and we were lucky that the first couple of conductors we worked under were very friendly towards us, and included us in the thing. Didn't treat us like we were bit part players.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was intimidating in one sense, but in another, we kind of knew that we had a bigger handle on this music than they did, really.
Yeah, brilliant.
I remember in the first rehearsal of a piece called Baba Yar, huge orchestral piece, had about 8 horns in it, 8 French horns. They all walked out of the rehearsal because they essentially said this music's unplayable. And if I remember correctly, Steve's not with us anymore, but he was in the rehearsal. Sorry if I'm misremembering this, Steve, but they said this is unplayable, words to that effect. And Steve said, well, the De Volharding Orchestra in Amsterdam, they could play it. And they all walked out. The horns walked out.
No way.
Yeah. And so things like that kind of made you feel comfortable.
Of course.
Because, we were playing it.
Yeah.
I didn't have to play the horn part, thankfully, but we were doing our bit and it was okay.
But at the same time, surely all this time it's making you a more rounded musician.
Well, I hope so. Yeah. We certainly had we're doing lots of different stuff, varied stuff, and hopefully learning from it all. Yeah.
Yeah. So I started to digress there, but yeah, we were on the path of where it went for you after that. So where did you sort of, where did it lead to after all of those gigs?
It lasted till about 2000, maybe. There was all the orchestral stuff, and then Tim, who I mentioned earlier, who was playing guitar in Steve's band, he got a show. He got Rent.
Okay.
Yeah, he was depping on it, and then the guy whose chair it was left, and they got Tim in to take the guitar and keyboards chair.
Right.
On Rent, which for anyone watching is a West End show from the late 90s, sort of New York hipster show.
Yeah.
Good one. So Tim got that chair, and he didn't want to do too much of it. He was quite busy already, and he wanted to kind of be that West End player that deps it out quite a lot.
Yeah.
But still had it there, which is the best way to be.
Yeah.
Stop you going mad. So he got this gig, and he essentially said to the fixer at the time, I'm going to want to dep this out quite a lot. And the fixer said, oh, fine, don't worry, we've got a series of deps. But he struggled a little bit to get a dep whenever he needed one, because obviously not everyone's available all the time.
Sure.
And he called me and said, look, it's keyboards and guitar, but it's really not that hard. It's not, I'm no guitar player. You've never heard me play guitar, but I'm no virtuoso. I can play a bit, I'm no virtuoso. But this thing was like mostly rhythm guitar and a bit of Hammond organ and a little bit of sort of piano here and there. He said, look, you'll be all over this. He said, how do you fancy coming in and depping for me on this show? Now, at that point, I'd never done a West End show. But he needed somebody who was going to be available. And frankly, I was.
Right.
So I went in and did that one. Really enjoyed it. Begged Phil Lachlan, who was the bass player on Rent.
No way.
Yeah. Begged him to let me do the bass chair when he took a night off, let me do the bass. And obviously he had his own depths, and he didn't want to just sort of let this person. We'd only just met, really.
Yeah.
Although we got on great, and eventually, I think the show was going to close not long after I started doing it. Maybe 6 months after I started doing it, it was winding down anyway. And again, I begged him, and bless him, eventually he went, "Okay, how about you do Saturday?" So then I'd done a show on bass, and that meant that I could do that thing that you do and call a couple of people who I didn't really know,
sure.
and say, look, I've done a show. It went okay. If you need anybody, I'm here. One of those people was Steve Price, who does Lion King, and I went in and did that.
Okay.
And from there, once you've done a few, as you know, people will start calling you to go in debt.
Yeah, I think that's. I never knew that it was Phil that gave you your first dep.
Yeah. The wonderful Phil Lachlan, and I'm still grateful for that opportunity that he gave.
Yeah, he's such a lovely guy, and in turn, he's obviously one of your deps now on Mamma Mia, which is even better. Yeah, he's great. So, aside from starting to carve your way, depping on a few shows in town and stuff like that, you also were doing stuff with artists. So who was the first on that side of the fence? Who was the first artist that you worked with, and what did you do?
The first kind of pop artist that I worked with was a boy band called A1. Do you remember them?
Vaguely,
A1?
yeah.
They weren't around all that long. In fact, I think the tour I did was for their first album. That might be incorrect.
Okay.
And I'm not even sure there was another album after that. Maybe there was. But they had a #1 single with a cover of Take On Me by a-ha.
Okay.
That was during the tour. They had that #1 during the tour that I did with them. And it was great fun. It was really good.
So how did you get into that, into doing that stuff? Who was it?
Again, that was Tim again. Tim from the Steve Martin band. From Rent, he got a gig with Boyzone. It's slightly convoluted. One of the deps on Rent was doing the Boyzone gig on keyboards and guitar, and then left that gig to go to LA, I think, and go and be a songwriter or something. Okay. And got Tim to do the Boyzone gig, so he went in and did that. And the MD of that gig was the same guy that did A1, a guy called Richard Taylor.
Right. Okay.
Keyboard player and musical director. And when he did A1, it was like, okay, who should we get to play bass? And again, I'm lucky. Tim said, well, I know somebody.
Nice.
I did a couple of one-off little gigs with Richard. I think he was just kind of testing it out, like by way of an audition.
Sure.
And then went and did A1, and then A1 led to Westlife, more or less the same band. Did Westlife, their first tour, which was a really long one, like six months or something.
Must have been quite a big one because it was their first one as well.
Yeah, well, ridiculously, it was their first tour, but they'd already had eight #1 singles.
Really?
When they went, they up to that point they'd never done a sort of proper tour. They'd done gigs like the Capitol Ballroom, those kinds of things, but it was their first proper tour. But yeah, it was all arenas. Like I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was something like 20 nights at the point in Dublin.
Really?
Yeah, ludicrous. Like 10 nights at Wembley Arena, absolutely sold like hotcakes, and that was a real eye opener for me. As that how a sort of proper pop gig works. And
yeah, of course.
So I did that one Westlife tour. Then it was Fame Academy. There was a BBC TV program called Fame Academy.
That's right, I remember it. Yeah.
Yeah, and the winner, there might have only been 1 year, but the winner of the year I did it was a guy called David Snedden, a Scottish guy. Yep. And there was an Irish girl called Sinead Quinn who came second.
Okay.
And Lamar, who's still around, he was in that series as well.
Right.
He's still making records. And they did a tour, an arena tour after the show ended. And same production company as the Westlife tour, same MD as Westlife tour.
Yeah.
And so, I ended up on that as well.
Nice.
And then out of that, Sinead did her own tour, which I did as well. And that one was with a drummer called Carl Brazil, who since then, I've done lots of things with since then. This was like 2003 now I'm talking about, maybe.
Sure.
And then not long after that, I did Lulu's band for a while with Carl.
I didn't know that, really.
Yeah, did 2 tours with Lulu.
Nice. How was she to work with?
Amazing. I mean, what a singer.
Yeah, absolutely.
A really great singer. The little experience that I've had with artists of that kind of vintage,
Yeah.
They really can do it. They can really properly sing. Because they had to,
yeah, of course. But it never leaves them, does it? Because I was watching a thing the other day and Tom Jones was on there and he just got up and did it, but it's just always so effortless. And they're never miming and they're always singing live. And it's, like you say, they were just brought up in that era where it's just in their veins to do it. And they wouldn't do it any other way, would they?
No, exactly. And so that was a real experience. Being around her, and also the first time I'd realised possibly the eccentricities that artists can have as well. Sure. She was an unusual kind of character.
Right.
She travelled with a healer. She had a healer that travelled with her, which just wasn't something. I'm no criticism of that whatsoever. It was just something I wasn't used to. It was a world that I'd never inhabited before.
You mean you've never travelled? You've never talked with someone with a healer before?
No, I hadn't. No. But it seemed to work. Like a
faith healer?
Yeah, I guess. Okay.
All right.
I guess so. Yeah.
She's Lulu. She can do what she wants.
Yeah, I don't really know. I was never in the room when the healing occurred, but I guess it was a kind of faith healing. She certainly had a lot of faith in the fact that this lady would be able to help her out on days when she wasn't feeling on top form.
Right.
So that was an eye opener. Wow. But mainly, what a singer is mainly what a singer. Yeah.
And what a healer.
I don't know. Like I say, I never. I was never healed.
So what after Lulu was that when things I'm trying to bridge the gap to James Blunt a sec.
Yes, well we're only one step away.
Lovely, I'm loving it.
While we were doing Lulu's band, I may as well tell you the whole story. Carl, the drummer, he got a gig miming on a German TV show with Elton John. I can't remember what Elton John was promoting at the time, but he went on this kind of, equivalent of Good Morning Britain or whatever and did the live spot and just had a miming band with him, didn't take his own band. And I honestly don't know how this happened, but Carl ended up doing that gig. He went and did it, but Elton's manager was James Blunt's manager, same guy called Todd Interland.
Okay.
At that time, he was managed by his own management company called Rocket Management.
Right.
And Todd was an employee at that point of Rocket Management. He ended up running it, but at that point he was an employee of them and was there with Elton. And so met Carl and they just started talking and Todd said to him, look, I've got this guy coming through, a guy called James Blunt. At this point, no one had heard of him. He hadn't done anything yet. He's going to need a band. Do you fancy it? So Carl said, yeah, absolutely. And again, brought me in, just a stroke of luck again. And we, a couple of months later, we met James in a Starbucks in Fulham, and he just seemed like a good guy. And he told us what he wanted out of his band, and we said, "Great, we'll do it." But we didn't know what it was going to be at that point. I think.
No, and I was just going to say, having listened to everything you've just said about all the previous people you'd worked with, A1, Westlife, various people from the TV show world as well. No one's future is ever guaranteed. No one's career is ever guaranteed. Therefore, if you're a member of their band, you never know how long it's going to go on for. Difference this time, though, I suppose, that your tenure with James Blunt would be something that would last quite a considerable amount of time, and the fact that you were there almost from the beginning with him.
Yeah, I feel extremely fortunate to have had that experience because it was a bit like being in a band, having your own band, getting signed. Yeah. And making records and all that, but without any of the pressure of it being your thing.
Yeah.
Because it was all him, they were his songs, it was his deal. None of us were signed to anything. We were just employees, essentially. Sure. But it was a proper band in the sense that it was always the same people. And whenever he did anything, it was always us. We didn't play on the first record because when we met him, he'd already made the first album.
Yeah.
So that was a separate thing. But from the point that we became his band, we were his band, and so it was a bit like being in your own thing.
I know that you went to LA to record. Would it have been the second album?
Yeah. What
came first though? Before that, did you start doing live gigs with him?
Yeah. So we toured the first album a lot for like 18 months or something. A really, really long time on and off.
Do you mind mentioning at this point as well who else was in the band?
not at all. So Carl, who I've already mentioned, Carl Brazil
Sure.
on the drums, a piano player called Paul Beard, who now is with Art Garfunkel. He's Art Garfunkel's pianist now.
Wow.
But had done a lot of things. He'd already been in Black Grape, you know, the offshoot of the Happy Mondays. He'd been doing that. So he was already quite experienced in that world. So him on piano, me, Carl, and then a guitar player. It was Paul. I can't remember his surname. The original guitar player didn't hang around for too long because he had his own deal.
Okay.
I wish I could remember his surname. But then it became Ben Castle, a guy called Ben Castle, who now lives in Australia. I haven't seen him for a long time. But,
not another guitar player called Ben Castle. Who?
No. There's about four Ben Castles.
There is. There's loads of them. Yeah.
Saxophone players and guitarists. This is a Ben Castle who he had his own band called Amber Shades at that time. Not someone you'd see in the Western theatres or anything like that.
Sure.
Different kind of sort of good player, really. Different kind of musician, but a really good one. And he really brought something to the band. It was nice to see, kind of bluesy, slightly country-ish edge to it.
Yeah. So your first gigs with James Blunt, what sort of venues are we talking? What sort of capacities are we talking originally when you first went out?
So the very first one we did was upstairs at the garage in Islington. So that held about 100 people, 150 maybe. Yeah, that was the very first one. It was like a showcase thing. And then from there it was theatres in this country. Yeah. And in America, clubs, quite small, 300 people clubs initially. And in Europe, the same thing. But once You're Beautiful became a hit, which was July 2005. So we'd been doing the thing a year or so by then. Once that became a hit, everything just exploded and the venues became enormous. And we were doing arenas in France and 12,000 people in Switzerland. That leap happened really quickly just with one hit record.
Yeah, I remember trying to think who I was. Oh, it was Simon. When Simon Merry was on here, we were talking about because he was with Rick Astley before the sort of second coming of Rick Astley, and he said exactly the same thing, that they were doing like Butlins and places like that, and almost overnight they went from doing Butlins and the small places to the Sheds and the arenas and all like that, just like that, and it happened incredibly quickly in a similar vein.
Just to illustrate that, consecutive years of Glastonbury. The first time we did Glastonbury was not long after his first album. Might have even been just before his first album came out. And we played in a little tent. And when we first went on stage, I think there were 3 people in the tent, one of whom was asleep on the ground. Right. We were on at like midday or something. Right. And then the following year, Pyramid Stage, everyone there,
Jesus.
That's how quickly it happened.
That's the space of 1 year.
I think it was 1 year. Forgive me if my memory's a bit hazy. It might have been 2 years, but the principle still stands. Yeah.
Incredible. From there, when I want to know about when you went to, you've told me the story on a personal level, but I want to know about when you went to the States to record the album and stuff like that.
So we did this tour for the first album, which was really long, and during that tour, we started to write new songs, and we started to play them live. Some new songs. And so when he came to making his next album, it just seemed logical that rather than use American studio musicians, which is what he did on the first one, that we would record it. And so they just made a plan for that. And we went to LA for a month and recorded those songs and some newer ones that he'd written. And we rehearsed them for a week out there, then tracked the kind of main tracking for a week at a studio called Ocean Way, I think it was. Okay. Forgive me if that's wrong. And then did the overdubbing at the producer's house. The producer was a guy called Tom Rothrock, who'd done Elliott Smith and Beck previously, amongst other things. So we did a lot of stuff at his house, overdubbing at his house. It was my favourite month of what I loosely term career. I absolutely loved it. Yeah.
I remember you saying, but it must have been, God, it just must have been great. You know what I mean? You're with an artist whose trajectory is going upwards quickly. You're recording essentially the follow-up album in LA with a bunch of your mates. What more do you want? You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, nothing. That was.
I'll tell you what more you want, and you got it as well. A wicked bass line for what would be the single, which every time I hear, if I'm going around Tesco or something, if I'm sitting in a pub, that song comes on, I'm like, there he is.
Well, thank
And
you. Yeah,
I've just got to explain here that the song in question is 1973 by James Blunt, which has I always said to you, it's very much like one of these nights, because it's sort of and it's just a brilliant bass line, and that's yours, man.
Thank you. Yeah, and I I'm very lucky to have had the chance to do that. And it's interesting that you say it's like one of these nights, because sorry, if I can tell you another long story,
please.
It's brilliant, because all these things are coming back to me because you're asking me these questions, and I'm quite enjoying the memories. We rehearsed that song for a day, putting it together. He had the song, but he wasn't sure if it was going to be like an acoustic guitar thing, or he was going to sit at the piano and play it. And we tried it loads of different ways. We did a kind of folky thing, more of a kind of Coldplay rock thing. He didn't seem to be quite sure how he wanted it to go, but he knew how the song was going to be, just how it was going to be dressed up. And we ended up, I don't remember how, playing it a bit like Staying Alive by the Bee Gees.
Okay.
Which kind of was where it ended up. It ended up being almost like a disco thing, which was quite good, because it was about Pasha, the nightclub where he lives in Ibiza. There's a plaque. I think it opened in 1973. Okay. So it's kind of all bound up in that imagery, the lyric. So it ended up being this kind of 70s West Coast, but a bit disco, a bit like One of These Nights.
Yeah.
So that was in my head. When we got to that point, that thing was in my head. And he said, I think it needs a sort of signature bass line. And I thought, oh, here we go. Pressure's on, And but because One of These Nights was in my head, I thought, well, I can't play anything like that, because it will just be too much like One of These Nights if I do that. So I spent the next, whatever it was, half an hour trying different things, trying not to play anything like One of These Nights. Eventually, right. and although he's not necessarily specific what he wants, he does know what he wants. So he's constantly going, no, not that one, no. I mean, maybe a bit more like that. So he knows where he wants to end up.
Yes.
But isn't necessarily sure how to get there. And so, like I say, I'm trying to avoid getting too close to that thing. Eventually, I get a bit frustrated, and I think at one point I actually played doom 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 like the One of These Nights thing.
Yeah.
At which point the drummer laughs and he goes, "That's it." And I have to go, well, no, we can't do that, because that's something else.
There's a slight copyright issue on that one.
Yeah, exactly. And he said, no, well, yeah, but that kind of thing, along those sort of lines. So now I'm trying to straddle being like that, but not being too much like that.
Yeah, of
which,
course.
Touch wood, and hopefully.
I mean, it's definitely its own thing. And I think it's just because, I'm a huge Eagles fan, and I'm obviously very familiar with that. And it's just, because you're sliding up, but it's, it's an amazing song, and one of those that's got a very distinct bass line to it. And the fact that it's you, and you did it, and you came up with it, man, that's something to be proud of.
No, I am. I'm proud of it. And we worked hard between us all, by like a sort of committee, deciding what it was going to be.
Yeah.
But I just kept coming up with ideas until one of them stuck. Really, that's all I could think of to do. You always hope that you're going to play your first idea, and the artist's going to go, "That's it. It's exactly what I wanted." Yeah. Well, genuinely, honestly, that day, that's not what happened. I must have gone through 100 different things.
I bet.
Before eventually went, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Give us some of the highlights of your time with James Blunt. I mean, obviously you said about already recording that album, doing Glastonbury, briefly some of the other amazing times you had with him.
Glastonbury, that album, as I say, was probably my favourite thing. We played at Elton John's Oscars party every year. He does a post-Oscars party for his AIDS Foundation. It's like a charity thing.
Yeah.
And we played with him. We played Tiny Dancer with Elton there, which was like a pinch myself.
Wow.
Moment,
that's amazing.
No, I loved it. That was a big thing. But do you know what? Mostly it's the places we went that I remember that really stick in my head. Just saw some incredible places. And I can't always remember where we were exactly or what place we were playing, but just moments when things were really working, when you felt like you could just sort of lean back into it. This, you know, the music's playing itself.
Playing itself. Yeah.
And when you get those moments, you don't forget them, and where you are and what it is that you're doing becomes almost irrelevant.
Yeah.
But I still remember those moments. They feel like the most important things, really.
How long was it that I know you still do go back every now and then and do gigs with him, but how long was that initial term how many years was it that you were with him for? So
about 3.5 or 4, about 2004 till about 2008.
Okay. So 2008, like you had a family by then, and you wanted to spend a little less time on the road, etc. What else were you doing though? Because you worked with Natalie and Imbruglia as well, didn't you?
Yeah. That, I think that came about through Carl again as well, the drummer.
Okay.
He got that gig. I went in and did that, and then he did that gig for a while, and then he left. He was doing lots of other things. Big busy guy, you know, really good. And yeah, he went off to do other things, and so we got another drummer in called Jerry Brown, and the band kind of changed then. She made another album. It was kind of a different sound.
Okay.
And so we brought in another guitar. So we had 2 guitar players. In fact, Tom Longworth was one of the guitar players who you've had on this.
Yeah, he said about it. Yeah.
Yeah. And when Carl left that band, I became the MD of it, because Carl had been in charge of it. And then when he left, I sort of took charge of it. So that was a new thing for me.
Yeah.
We ended up she didn't do an awful lot of kind of proper touring, but just lots of one-off gigs, really, festivals and things.
Yeah.
But it was really good experience and good fun. There's some great tunes in her catalog.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Give us an idea of other artists that you've worked with or recorded with over the years as well.
Ben's Brother. I don't know if you remember them. There's a band called Ben's Brother who again, in that sort of noughties period, had a couple of radio hits, did a couple of albums with them, and a little bit of touring, but just sort of around this country.
Sure.
Basically, during the Blunt stuff, we got a little bit of a reputation, in a good sense, for being quite a half-decent band, you know, backing band. And so 2 producers, both of whom worked with James, a guy called Sasha Scarbeck, who co-wrote You're Beautiful with him, and another guy called Steve Robson, who's written some sort of country hits and lots of pop records that you would know, and had produced some James stuff as well. They hit a bit of, and another guy called Martin Terefi, a Swedish guy, another producer and songwriter. They all had their own studios, and they were all writing lots of songs for artists like Katie Tunstall, that sort of period of time, you know.
Yeah.
Richard Fleischman was another one I remember coming through there. Ben's Brother were another band that came through that. And they had a bit of a purple patch around that time. They were writing for loads of different people and producing loads of different people, and consequently had to churn out a lot of songs and a lot of even demos, not even finished things.
Right.
And in order to do that quickly enough, rather than just play everything themselves, which they were capable of doing, they got a kind of almost like a house band in for a while to just be able to get this stuff out there, pitching for songs constantly. Right. And we became that for those people for a while. So,
amazing.
So you know, I take that in one direction. I'm on a couple of their things, but they came out of things that they were just those guys writing songs that they were pitching, that ended up being done by those artists, and that ended up using what I'd done, even though at the time I did it, I didn't know that was who it was for.
When you recorded it, was it on the proviso that it might be used in something, or were you more of thinking it was more of just basic demos that wouldn't go anywhere? Well,
the deal was that they would pay us to come in, pay us per track. Yeah, they'd pay us what they would call a demo rate. So it wasn't, you know, a lot of money. It wasn't like, you know, proper recording session money.
Sure.
But then if it got used, they would then top that up to what they would pay someone if they'd known they were playing on a record.
Right.
So yeah, it was quite a nice little thing for a while.
So you end up playing on stuff by Take That and One Direction, but I guess you wouldn't have known until the album came out.
Exactly that. Or you know, a bit before, because the producers would get in touch and say, look, that one's being used.
Here's a check.
Yeah, I mean, that didn't happen to me that often. A few times, you know, but Carl, it happened. That kind of thing happened to him a lot more, because obviously the drums are so integral to these things. They're not going to get rid of those.
Yeah.
But depending how things change, you know, the bass might stay or it might not. But yeah, it happened a few times, and that was really nice when it did.
Yeah, amazing.
we were really lucky that because those producers and writers were so busy, they needed people to kind of help them make the demos to do it quickly enough. So yeah, that was good. That worked well for a while.
Wow. Now, I don't know how many years ago it was, but the first day I met you, you were coming in to try out as the new bass player in Mamma Mia, the West End show, Mamma Mia in London. And I just happened to be in for, I don't know, I was either in for Keith or Terry. And I was there for your first one. And just tell me about what you remember around that time, because obviously since then, for, I don't know, you're going to tell me how many years you've been the mainstay bass chair holder in Mamma Mia. How long has it been?
December 2015 I started. So we're hurtling towards 6 years, aren't we? Yeah.
That's crazy. That's unbelievable, honestly.
But my first tryout was October 2015. That's when we met the first time. Is that when
we first met?
But then I started proper in the December.
Yeah.
And I remember distinctly you were in for Keith because Terry was there as well my first time.
Was he? Okay, there you go. Yeah. Oh yeah, he was, because we all went out. All of us went out, didn't we? That's right. Yeah, I remember. Yeah. But they are great tunes to play, aren't they? And it's a bloody great show. And like I said, when Simon was on it, because Simon's obviously a dep on it as well as I am, and it's terrifying for you for the first time with any of those things when you go in for the first time. I don't know how it was for you, knowing that obviously there was a gig off the back of it as well, had you got it. But they are great songs to play, and it's a great show. Never really gets old, does it? No,
they are great songs. Like anything that you do repetitively, it can start to drive you mad after a while. But it doesn't drive. I don't think it drives you mad in a musical sense, because they are great songs. It's just the repetition. Yeah. You could be playing the greatest music in the world, Of
course,
and some would argue that we are playing ever.
Yeah.
But if you just have to do it the same every day, sometimes twice a day, eventually it does drive you a bit crazy. But you have to find ways to keep it interesting and try and be musical about it. Try
like
not to lose that side.
We go to nice places when I'm in, don't we? And
exactly, musically, you mean?
Yeah. We go to the best places musically, obviously.
But you were saying about what it's like first time you do something, first time you do one of those shows.
Yeah.
And for anyone watching who's never done that, it is a bit of a baptism of fire, because you can learn the show as well as you can. You know the show inside out. You learnt it at home, heard the tapes, read the parts. But when you go in and you're on a headphone system and it's all very clinical and everyone can hear everything and you can hear everything, and it's dark and there's a guy waving his arms around who you haven't seen up until this point.
Yes.
It is quite terrifying. I don't care how many times you do it. It is quite terrifying.
No, it is. And I always used to think it was perhaps just me, but I know everyone's the same. And again, when Simon was on here, and who else did I have on here? Someone else, and we were talking about dep and how, and because it's exactly what you just said. It's not like, no matter how many shows I've done or however many I've depped on, when you're in that one for the first time, and you got your in-ears on, and they're just about to cue it up, and you're looking at the MD. And I remember vividly my first one in Mamma Mia, I was in for Terry, and I'm sat there, and you got 1,000 people there, and you got the whole, and this show which has been going for years and years and years, and you're there and you're ready, and you think, oh God, just hold it back, just hold it back. And then I remember just looking at Marcus, who is the MD, who's a brilliant MD, and he just looked over at me, and I just remember seeing him do something to his mixer and sort of put one of the faders up. And I just took that as, I bet he's putting me up so he can hear, just so he can hear me. And there's that added pressure of, the MD's listening out and he's used to hearing it a certain way. It is, man, but it's also great fun. And I think it makes you a much more rounded musician for all of those things that you do, for all the pressures that you put yourself under.
Well, I think those times when you're under those pressures, that's when you really get to sort of use your musical instincts, isn't it? And try to make it work in however you can.
Yeah.
And it's almost a shame when you've been in there for a couple of weeks, you're not needing to do that anymore. You've settled right into it. And then there's a sort of sweet spot where you know it really well and you're just enjoying playing it.
Yeah, of course.
And then obviously the repetition kicks in, after that.
Yeah. And I think it also, when you sat around with a band of the caliber of particularly that show, there's some unbelievably talented musicians in that band and great guys as well. And you just want to sort of do it a service, really, the whole thing, don't you?
Yeah, exactly that.
So let's move on to, even though obviously you've been in the show for a number of years now, it hasn't stopped you from going back and doing other gigs. Quite a few years ago, I was in Florida with Mel and the kids, and you happened to be there at the same time because you were just joining James Blunt's tour out there, which you were filling in for your successor, who gets you back, like I say, from time to time, and you go and you went on to do North American tour. I met up with you that night, although you'd literally just flown in as well, and you were just watching, though we got to watch the show with James Blunt, and he was supporting Ed Sheeran, which was, and so it was an unbelievable gig, you know, seeing the whole thing, obviously seeing you out there. So you went on to do that whole North American tour, didn't you? Yeah. How was it? Was it great? Obviously, it peaked after, you know, peaked seeing me, and then it was all downhill.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, it's difficult to live up to that first night, but no, it was great actually, and in some respects, the easiest tour I've ever done. In that we were supporting, so we were off stage by 9:30, something like that, and we only did 45 minutes. Yeah. So yeah, in that respect, it was really easy, and because it wasn't James's tour, the sound checks were quite curtailed. You know, there was no kind of rehearsing new stuff in the sound check or anything. It all had to be done quite quickly because obviously it was Ed's gig. Yeah. So yeah, in that respect, it was really easy, and just also because it was multiple nights, because obviously Ed Sheeran sells a lot of tickets. He was doing multiple nights in these arenas. So we'd get to a place and it wouldn't just be do the gig, get back on the bus and drive to the next one. You'd be in a hotel for a couple of nights.
I mean, it must have been nice as well, because it wasn't like you were any old support band, because they have a great relationship between them. And didn't Ed Sheeran, back in the early days, wasn't Ed Sheeran James Blunt's support act?
That probably did happen at some point. I don't think I was there when it did, but they were on the same management. So then they knew each other. Obviously, Ed came through a bit after James did, but so James was aware of him from when he first started to break through. So yeah, same management, and so they knew each other really well.
I want to move on to a story that actually it was something I spoke to Tom Longworth about when he came on here. That you and I were stood outside the Nell, probably having a pint, and we were talking about flight cases, me and you.
Yeah, right.
And I don't know why we were talking about flight cases, but you were saying, "Oh yeah, I just got some new flight cases," and I was like, "All right, yeah." But you were, you know, being how you are, you were quite reserved about it. I was like, "What you got them for? You know, what are you up to?" And I'm questioning you, like, "Oh, I'm doing some gigs abroad." "Oh yeah, okay. Who are you doing them with?" And you're like, "Oh, I'm doing it with Robbie Williams." I was like, "Fair play, that's awesome." But that, you know, and that was that, and then, you know. And then it was during the World Cup when I turned it on, and there you were on the World Cup opening ceremony. I spoke to Tom at length about how that all came about, and because he had this extra thing where he had to run around the field, and it was a brilliant story.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But how was it from your perspective doing that?
Well, I'm not a regular member of that band.
No, of
course.
I'm
just a dep. Jerry Meehan is the bass player, and he's, you know, a very good one. He is too. But he does other things as well, and I think he was touring with Brian Ferry, and so couldn't do the opening of the World Cup and a few other gigs that were around the same time.
Sure,
all private gigs, corporate gigs. You know?
Yeah,
but he couldn't do them, so they needed a replacement. So in I went, which is great, and I had done a couple of things with them before years ago, so I sort of knew what was going on, and I knew the crew and the band and everything. But yeah, Jerry just said, there's some dates, Robbie dates I can't do. These are the dates. Can you do them? And I said, well, presuming I can get out of the show, which touchwood is generally okay, then yeah, I can do them. But at that point, I didn't know what they were.
Right.
And so I said, oh, what? Because they were a bit spaced apart. It wasn't like a tour. I said, what are they? He said, oh, they're just corporates. Yeah. Oh, okay, great. You know, so fine. That was all I knew at that point. And then there was a bit of kerfuffle. I started to realise there was a bit more to it, because I started to hear, oh, Jerry really wants to do whatever that date was, the 18th of June or something. Jerry really wants to do that one. So we might not need you for that. We might be flying him in and out. Fine, you know, whatever. Just tell me what you need me for.
Sure.
But I started to realise that there was something about this date that was different to the others.
Right.
And so after asking, they'd been sworn to secrecy because no one's supposed to know who's going to be opening the thing, you know. So that's why they were being cagey about it. But eventually someone said, all right, it's the opening of the World Cup. You know, the first match in Moscow. So of course I'm wow, because I love football as well. So the whole thing was just suddenly turned into a brilliant thing.
Yeah.
But as you can imagine, the opening of the World Cup in Moscow, it wasn't necessarily straightforward.
No.
I'm sure Tom told you all about it, and when he was on.
Yeah, he was sort of because I was saying to him about because I was sure you told me afterwards that didn't you have to have a run through like a rehearsal of mainly for camera placements and stuff, so you wouldn't be picked up when you're moving on and off the pitch, and just a whole bizarre thing.
It was, and it was complete chaos. Clearly they had bigger things to worry about at the World Cup than a 20-minute performance by a pop star in the middle of the pitch. But also it was a worldwide television event, so it was kind of, in one sense it was a really big deal, and in another sense it was the least important thing that anyone was worried about. So it was an odd one. So we did have this rehearsal, and you kind of felt like they were squeezing it into this tiny period of time that they could allow it to happen. And it became clear that not all of the gear was there, so we ended up doing the run through without any of the gear, or without most of the gear on the pitch. And it was like, well, is there going to be any gear? When's it coming? The thing's tomorrow, because it was all rented in. Yeah. So it just felt kind of chaotic and a bit of a worry. But in the end, everything was there and it was all fine and good fun. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Is there anything we haven't covered that you want to talk about?
I feel like I've talked a lot, so I doubt it. I'm sorry if I've waffled on too much, but I genuinely enjoyed it. No, not really. I mean, certainly in terms of things I've done, we've pretty much covered it all, I think. Since I've been in the show, there's been doing less kind of one-offs and things. It's been, obviously you start to just look after your show and you don't get tempted out to do other things quite so much. But still, lucky there's still some things happening. Yeah.
I mean, we were just talking before we came on about some other exciting gigs that you've got coming up, and I'm sure they'll be fantastic. And I think it's nice as well, you sort of going back to Phil Lachlan, the fact that he gave you your first dep in the West End, and now you have him in as one of your deps in the show, and he's a great guy. And it's funny how things pan out, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's a real community, isn't it? The whole musician thing, and especially in the West End. Yeah. Because everyone's kind of in the same couple of square miles and frequenting the same pubs and all that stuff. Of course.
Yeah. This is it, man.
It's like the old days when if you needed a band, you just went to the pub nearest the theatre and saw who was in there. It's good.
But that's it. I mean, that's what I've always sort of chuckled about, because it's like an old school network, isn't it, down there? There's no social media might as well not bother existing for the guys down there, because no one, that's not how any of them get work. It's the fact that it's just all networking. Out there playing the whole time.
And long may that continue. I really hope it does. But I kind of thinking at some point the theatre's due a real modernisation in the way they go about things. We've been the way things have worked, certainly music wise in the West End, has been the same for a really long time. Yeah, and it's come under threat from various sort of technological advances. Sure. And fingers crossed it continues like it is now for a really long time.
Yeah, I hope so.
Certainly the pandemic has put a microscope on that a little bit, and people have had to rethink how it all works. But touch wood, we'll still be there for a while yet.
Exactly. Malcolm Moore, thank you very much, mate.
No, thank you. I've had a blast. It's been really nice.